This is Lucy O'Hagan from Wild Awake, and I'm delighted to be presenting the first of these 3 videos for Dublin City Learning Festival. This first video is about wildlife tracking. What wildlife can you see when you're out in the city? And where can you go to see it? So you might be surprised, but there is lots of wildlife in the city. Maybe you've even been lucky enough to see some. Look out your window now and see if you can see any birds. Can you hear them? Or maybe you've seen a fox late at night. So the amazing thing about wildlife tracking is that we don't need to actually see the wildlife to know that we're there. In wildlife tracking, we're following the clues and the signs that wildlife have left behind. What do you think that might be? So their tracks. So what tracks do their claws, their paws, their hooves, their feet leave on the ground? But animals do everything that we do. We are animals. So animals move across the land. They eat. They go to bed. They make homes. They poo. They pee. They mark their territory. All of these things we can look for when we're tracking wildlife. And this is possibly one of the oldest skills of humanity. It's what made us. And chances are one of your ancestors was a very successful tracker. It's what's got us here today. Now we don't need to track wildlife for food, but it's something that I love to do as a way of getting closer to wildlife and sometimes even seeing them. There are a couple of things we need to do though if we really want to wildlife track and become a successful wildlife tracker. And that is to step into the mind of a tracker. Somebody once told me it was known as losing your mind and coming to your senses. It's very important that we think about how we move in the woods or in the park or in the streets if we want to catch a glimpse of a fox track or maybe even see a bird in its nest feeding its chicks. How do you think we might move in the woods to see more wildlife? So it's important to open your eyes. And there's an animal that's really good at using their eyes. In fact, they rely on them in order to hunt and to feed. They come out at night and they fly so quietly across the sky. Any ideas what it might be? They have huge eyes. It's an owl. So an owl has these huge eyes and they're so big that they've actually outgrown their eye sockets, so they're frozen in place. They can't move for them. And of course they can move their head, but they also use something called wide-angled vision or owl vision. So you can tune in to your owl vision by doing this one simple activity. So to start with, you're going to pick a point in the distance to fix your eyes, and you're going to freeze your eyes right there. Don't move them at all. Have you got that spot? Now bring your hands in front of you and begin to wiggle your fingers. And now very slowly, without moving your eyes, remember they're frozen in your head, we're going to move our arms out. And whenever you can no longer see your wiggling fingers, you're going to stop. And you can just test the edge of where your vision ends. So we can do this in landscape and also from sky to ground. Again, don't move those eyes. And just check where you can see without moving your eyes. You can actually see so far. So with this wide-angled vision, our owl eyes tuned in, you can see all of this around you. And when you're walking through the park or down the street and you're looking for wildlife or signs, it's good to tune in to these owl eyes, and you might just see more wildlife than you were expecting. Another way is to listen. Now, as humans, our hearing can be quite good, but there's an animal that lives in the wild and also lives in Dublin's Phoenix Park, and they have these huge big ears that they move around. Do you know what animal I mean? Yeah, it's the deer. And the deer have these huge ears, and they act a little bit like satellite dishes. So they move and they can twist them right around to pinpoint sounds. The next time you see the deer, see if you can watch them do this. So we can do this too. If you cup your hands and pop them behind your ears, just notice how different it is. Maybe take them off, put them back on, and you can turn them around so you can listen behind you, or you can listen a little bit in front and a little bit behind. It's like having our very own deer superpower that we can tune into. So the last thing, if we're seeing with our owl eyes and we're hearing with our deer ears, is how will we move? Will we just stamp around? I think I just scared off some birds doing that. What we can do is walk very quietly. So notice, I begin with my tips of my toes go down first, and I test the ground. And if I'm sure I'm not going to break a stick, I'll move my weight onto the side of my foot and then my heel. And I never lift my foot very high off the ground like that, because then I'll become unstable. So I keep very low to the ground and move very slowly. Now try to do this, but do it with your owl eyes engaged and your deer ears on, and see how far you can get without making a noise. So I hope that was useful for you to learn some techniques of how you can move and hear and think like a tracker. It's time to go outside and test those out. And I'm going to show you some of the things that I see when I go outside. Enjoy. So one animal that I'm sure we all know about that lives in the park are the deer, particularly the fallow deer. So these deer live in large herds in the park, and they move across the park, and sometimes we can see them if we go on to the 15 acres, but sometimes we can't, but we still know that they've been in the area. And how do we know that? Well, we find their tracks, and their tracks will show us which way they've gone. So on this track here we can see the 2 toes of the deer, and if you look carefully in here you can see the 2 toe pads of the deer, and these are their nails, and this part in the middle separates the 2 toes. What way do you think this deer was going? That way. So the points point to the direction that it was going, and we can even begin to follow them. It's not just the deer's tracks that we can follow. We can also find evidence of what they've been eating. This is a bramble plant. You can see its thorns, and it's the same plant that will give us blackberries later on in the year. And if you look very carefully at the end of this, you can see that it's a little bit ragged. So this is really classic deer feeding sign. Deer only have teeth on the bottom of their jaw, and they have a bone plate on the top. So when they eat, they pull the plant, and they always leave this little ragged end. This is also at just the right feeding height for a deer to come along, and they particularly love the tender young shoots of the bramble at this time of year. And they're also good for humans to eat. Just watch the thorns. Hello, this is Lucy O'Hagan from Wild Awake. Just a little short one today. I've come upon this hole on my walk, and I just wanted us to have a closer look at it. So noticing the shape of the hole, so almost like a D shape. We can see the bottom is a little bit flatter, the top is round, and then this huge big spoil heap. So all of this has been dug out from underneath the earth, and as you can see there are great big rocks in it. And then this gorgeous little stripe where the animal is coming in and out. So with all of these clues together, we can tell that this is a badger set, the entrance to a badger set. So the shape of it is the badgers will slide down in on their bellies, and then also this spoil heap, because remember they have those huge big claws for excavating, so they're really digging everything out from underneath the earth. And when you see huge big stones like that, or big roots that are ripped through, there's really only one thing it can be. Having said that, if a badger abandons its set, other animals will move into it, but this looks like it's very much still in use, and you can see the traces of some claws and tracks in and out here. So there you go, a badger set. So here we have a track, and I'm going to take a moment just to count the toes on this track. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes, and a big blocky palm pad, which should be this part of our hand, which is shaped a little bit like a little kidney bean. And just in front of the toes, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 claws. So we have a 5-toed animal with big claws and a kidney-shaped pad. So this is really classic badger track. And in a badger track, all of these toes are in front of the kidney-shaped pad. And why do you think they have such big claws? It's for digging out. There are enormous sets. So badgers live in these sets and they move tons of earth from underneath the ground. So they need these huge big claws on their front feet to take out all of the earth. And that's how we can tell that it's a front or a rear badger track. So this would be a front, and because this is a tiny little toe, you can barely even see it. In badgers, this is equivalent to our thumb. So if we put our hand on the track, and that would be the thumb, and those would be the other toes. So this is a front right track. And if we move on down here, hopefully you'll be able to see the other tracks. And sometimes, you know, you don't even see the pads. You'll just see the claws, like here. Now there's the badger moving at quite a speed down this driveway. Now another animal that has big claws on the front is this one. We've got 2 tracks here. So let's count the toes together. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 toes. And then they have a big palm pad that's shaped a little bit like a triangle with these curved edges. And the claws, you can see 1, 2, 3, and little one under there underneath the grass. So a 4-toed animal with big claws and a big pad. Let's see, how many of these toes do you think we could fit in this big pad? Maybe 2? It's pretty big. Any guesses on what this might be? This is, of course, a dog track. Specifically, it's Ollie the dog's track. Dogs have 4 toes, and this other toe has moved up their leg. If you have a dog or a cat, you can go and look at this now. They have a little toe that's moved right up their arm. And they have these huge big claws. So those claws help them to get traction when they're running. So that's a dog track. Now let's look at another track, which is also in the dog family, but is a wild animal. Can you guess what it is? Now here's a beautiful thing to brighten up your Monday. A poo in a hole. And it's not just one hole. There's lots of holes around here. So not all of them have poos in them. This is really typical badger behaviour. So badgers will, not always, but a lot of the time, dig a hole called a latrine, which is another name for a toilet. And they will poo into the hole. And sometimes you'll find one just on its own. And sometimes you'll find a latrine that they've been coming back to again and again which can often mark the line between two territories of badgers. Badgers are really territorial, and most animals will use their scat or their pee to mark territory. And they can tell so much about the other animal just from the smell of their poo or pee. They can tell what sex the animal is, how old it is, how healthy they are. There's really a lot to know about someone just from their poo. And just for fun, here's a badger who's missed the hole. Uh-oh! Can you tell what kind of tree this is? Look closely and you'll see that there's still green needles on the tree. And it has a scaly bark. This is a pine tree, and it's our native Scots pine tree. And at the bottom we can see that somebody has been having a feast. And if we pick these up and look very closely, this is the pine cone of the Scots pine, and something has been nibbling it. And all around we can see the scales and the remains of somebody's dinner. So this is really typical squirrel feeding sign. And the reason I know that it's squirrel and not, say, a mouse or a vole is how messy it is. Squirrels are very messy eaters, and they always leave these little raggedy bits on the edge, and they'll leave these top scales. If it was a mouse, they're much tidier eaters. First of all, they don't leave those little straggly bits, and also a mouse will usually bring its dinner underneath a log or a rock or somewhere where it's protected from all the predators that might want to eat it. Whereas squirrels, where do you think they're eating their dinner? That's right, up the tree. And this way they can keep a good lookout while they're munching away on their pine cone. Sometimes if you're walking through the woods, you'll even come upon a little something called a squirrel's table. A squirrel's table is like a stump or a rock or somewhere high up where they can eat their pine cones or their spruce cones while still having a good lookout point. But this is very exciting actually, because this is red squirrel feeding sign, and red squirrels haven't been seen in this place for about 20 years. And more recently we found lots of pine marten scat, and we now know there's lots of evidence to prove that where the pine martens are native predator of the red squirrel are coming back, the red squirrels are coming back too. And the grey squirrels aren't doing so well because they can't reach the little branches that the red squirrels can, so they can't escape the pine martens as well. So yeah, this is a great way to show how with wildlife tracking we can tell where an animal has been without actually seeing it. So that's red squirrel feeding on the Scots pine cones. So I've come deep underneath this linden tree, and right at the base, in among the roots, I find somebody's stash. Can you see it? All of these little seeds from the linden tree have been eaten open. And there's even some hazelnuts in here too. So this is very typical mouse behaviour. Just as we were saying before, the mice will tuck themselves in at the base of a tree or under a rock where they can be safe to eat their nuts and seeds. And on this hazelnut, it's kind of hard to see, but you might be able to see there are little teeth marks and little marks all around the edge of the hazelnut, which is where the mouse has clamped its little teeth on the bottom and then used its top teeth to go around and around and around the top, a bit like a tin opener. In here I also spotted, oh, where's it gone now? Oh yeah, this one. So this is another hazelnut shell, but it's been cracked completely in half, which is actually something that a squirrel will do, not a mouse. Squirrels have much stronger heads and teeth than the mice, so they're able to get their bottom jaw underneath, like where my thumb is, and with their top teeth they'll dig it in and crack the nut completely in half. This is something that squirrels master over their lifetime, and quite often we'll find the nuts of younger squirrels having completely shattered in half like this one, because they're just learning how to do it. So we've got squirrel and mice and a plane.